Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you're joining us, from where you're joining us in the world. And welcome to the Bhavan's new online lecture series, PURÂ NAVA, which literally means looking at the ancient traditions and ancient cultures and identifying lessons that are relevant for modern life. We're very pleased to have as the inaugural speaker for the PURÂ NAVA series, Sri Subhanu Saxena. And Subhanuji is incredibly sort of unique and very sort of a polymath in the true sense. He's a highly successful executive, having worked for a number of the world's largest corporations. He's the managing partner at New Rhein Healthcare Private Equity. He is a director at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But really, for us today, he is a former Sanskrit student at the Bhavan, a former teacher of Vedic chanting at the Bhavan. He is an expert on the Vedas, Vedanta, and Advaita philosophy. He is a current executive member of the Bhavan, and he is going to deliver this 4-part fortnightly lecture series on ancient teachings for modern times. Subhanu, thank you very much for joining us today, and really looking forward to hearing this. For everyone, please post questions on the Facebook live stream via the comments, and we will pose those to Subhanu at the end of today. With that, I'm going to hand over to Subhanu. Thank you.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. Om Shrunvantu Vishve Amritasya Putra Aye Dhama Ani Divyani Tastuhu. Friends, Namaste, Swagatam, welcome to these lectures that we're running here via the Bhavan's online capabilities as a new way of reaching out to you during these times. And this lecture series is meant to also be a taster for a summer school course we will do on Vedic chanting. And the topic that we picked, I feel is very relevant to the times we're living in. Many of us have reflected on the events of previous months, previous years, and I come across a lot of people who are searching for meaning and purpose in everything that they do, are searching for forces that unify versus divide, and are searching for ways how they can lift themselves and live better lives, not just for themselves, but for others. And what we want to do in this lecture series is to give you a glimpse into what the ancient teachings of India have to say on these topics. So we're not going to tell you that this is the only way of thinking. We are simply going to share with you what that ancient call has been, give you an opening into the texts and the teachings that deliver messages that are meant to be eternal and timeless, and then to allow you to think about how that can be relevant in your day-to-day lives, personal and professional, through this 4-lecture series. I started with a mantra from the Rig Veda, which was recited by Swami Vivekananda at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago at the end of the 19th century. It said, Shrunvantu Vishve Amritasya Putraha, hear ye, O children of immortality, Aye Dhamani Divyani Dastuhu, those who are in celestial abodes here and beyond. And the ancient texts, the Vedas and that tradition, have a call to us but it's a call out into the universe more broadly for their teachings, and call us all children of immortality. And it gives you a hint for what some of the teachings guide us on in terms of our true nature, how to separate ourselves from the temporal and the impermanent, and find the permanent, eternal that's in all of us. And so what we're going to do in these 4 lectures is introduce you to the ancient texts of India, primarily the Vedic texts and the texts of philosophy, the Vedanta, and the ancient epics that put those teachings into very practical stories, and then try and relate those to the lives that we live today. So over the course of these 4 lectures, we'll spend most of the time today on the source text of the Vedas. Next lecture, we'll go deeper into the Vedanta tradition. And the third lecture, we will talk about the epics of India, the ancient stories in the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and lessons that can be drawn out for our day-to-day living. And then the last lecture focus more on what does it mean for our lives today, where I may touch on subjects such as leadership, how do you live a life of purpose and meaning. By then, hopefully, a lot of those themes would have come through the lectures that we're giving. And I really want to leave time for questions. So I'll speak for about 25 minutes, half an hour. We'll have 15 minutes to try and go over the questions. And as we progress through the lectures, if there are more questions coming, we can focus more on the questions in the later lectures. And we'll close, I'll give you a sense as to the curriculum for the Vedic chanting course, where we'll introduce folks that sign up for that to some of the important mantras in our Vedic tradition, the foundations and underpinning of thinking, a way of life, a way of viewing the world that you can carry with you every day if you master those texts. So that's the plan, and I'm delighted that you are able to come with me on this journey. And so, in the words of Julie Andrews, let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. And the original source of the wisdom of ancient India, which are the texts that we call Vedas. Ved, the root, means knowledge, to know. The Vedas are books of knowledge. We have 4 of those in our tradition that I'll go through in a second. And they are some of the oldest, possibly the oldest texts of the Indo-European tradition that are still live and vibrant today. So there is an important message I want to give you, that our tradition is not a dead tradition, it is a vibrant tradition. There are many scholars in India and abroad who are studying our ancient texts, learning how to recite them, the meaning. One of the roles we try to play at the Bhavan is to help preserve those traditions so that we can pass those teachings on that have come down to us over the millennia for future generations. The age of the Vedic texts has been up for some debate, where if you follow Western scholarship and the analysis linguists have done of the texts, you get to a date somewhere between 1300 and 1500 BC for the oldest Vedic text that we have, called the Rig Veda. If you then follow satellite imagery of rivers described in the Rig Veda, such as the mighty Saraswati River, the river Saraswati, that date can be taken further back by a few thousand years as to those mantras which were composed glorifying a river that dried up around 2000 BC. Those mantras must have been around much earlier. The third evidence that we try and use are the star constellations described in these ancient Vedic texts. And we understand the procession of motion, the wobble of the earth in the night sky, and how the backdrop of the night sky appears to move. We can back calculate. You then get dates 6,000 BC for some of those texts. But I'm here to tell you the exact age is actually a red herring. It doesn't matter. The poet Kalidasa, when he was starting out in his first set of plays, wrote a beautiful verse asking for patience from the audience, where he said, Purana mityeva nasadhu sarvam. Just because something is old, it doesn't make it good. Nachapi kavyam navamityavadyam. And also you should not denigrate a text because it is new. The most important thing for me is the message, the content of these texts. And I hope to help you understand that these are truly timeless and without time, without age. The fact that they have come from millennia ago should tell you that there has been a constant thread of human experience to try and understand our place in the world, that immense benefit to people 2000 BC, maybe earlier, and therefore may well be relevant for us today. So let's just assume that these are very old ancient texts that have been kept alive by a tradition of passing down from teacher to student that I will explain a bit later in the talk today. As I mentioned, we have 4 Vedas. And these Vedas, one way to understand them is to think about how they were deployed in ancient ceremonies to praise the divine spark within us and without us. The first role in some of these ceremonies was to invoke the deity, to invoke the divine essence that we wanted to worship. And that usually fell to the Rig Vedis, those who'd studied the Rig Veda. Rig means verse, literally. And the Rig Veda is the oldest expression that we have today of the tradition of ancient India, the Vedic tradition. And the oldest dates are ascribed to the hymns in the Rig Veda. What do you find when you look at these texts? Well, you find a range of hymns covering the whole gamut of life, existence. You also find histories, discussions of kings of the time. There is a mention of a Krishna, the Rig Veda, as an example. There are philosophical discussions. There are discussions about love, about life, about cosmology. And the rishis at the time were able to have a very deep experience of reality that came forth in these ancient mantras. Mantra actually means mananat trayateti mantraha. By constantly remembering it, reflecting on it, it protects you. So there was something nourishing in these ancient verses that came forward. And they're often expressed as a calling, an invitation. So the very first hymn of the Rig Veda, Agnimi ile purohitam yajnasya devam ritvijam hotaram ratnadhatamam agnim ile. We call on Agni, fire, to please come and be present at our ceremony here. So the role of the Rig Vedis was to invoke the deity at these ancient ceremonies, yajnas. We'll come on to the meaning of the word yajna because that's particular relevance in a modern setting. Once you've invited the deity, we praise them through song. When a guest visits you, hopefully you say, hello, how are you? Then you say, how wonderful do you look? It's lovely to see you. You bring a lot of joy into our life. Most of the time we like people to feel welcome and we praise them. Sama means song. And so the Samaveda, 90% of those verses are verses from the Rig Veda set to song. We gave a demonstration at the Bhavan a few years ago of the 4 Vedas being chanted. You may be able to find that YouTube link. If not, we can post it on the website. And you can hear Samaveda chanting in that song style. Subramhanyom, Subramhanyom, as an example. It's very lyrical, very musical, uplifting. And the Samavedi was there to praise. Having invoked the deity, you then had to perform the ceremony. That job fell to the Purohit, the priest. Purohit, things done for others. There is a sense of service and compassion that flows through all of the ancient traditions of India. And we'll come back to the role of compassion, altruism in modern society in probably the final lecture of this series. And there you find mantras that are long formulae statements, yajus as they're called. So the third Veda is called Yajurveda, the very first verse of the Yajurveda. Ishe tvorjetva vayavastho payavastha devo vasavita prarpayato shreshtatamaya karmana apyayadhamagniya deva bhagamurjaswati payaswati prajavatir anamiva ayakshmamavastena ishatama kashagumso rudrasya hetif parivo vranaktu dhruva asmin Gopatau syata bahvir yajamanasya pashun pahi. Imagine if you could do that as one breath, or if you have 3-4 scholars reciting that together as one sound. Beautiful. Ishe twa for food, the urje twa for the strength. These are calls to the energy that's being created in the ceremony. Yajurveda. You then have the fourth Veda, Atharvaveda. And there was an important figure at these ceremonies called the Brahman who oversaw all the activities but didn't take part. That was said to be the person who'd studied the Atharvaveda, because to study the Atharvaveda, you would first had to have studied all the other Vedas. And that's a long process. So if you wanted to study one Veda in entirety, it's 12 years of study. For your first Veda, you need to study 6 ancillary sciences: Shiksha, pronunciation, Chandas, meter, Vyakarana, grammar, Nirukta, etymology, Jyotisha, astronomy, astrology, more astronomy in the olden days, and Kalpa, ritual. Each of those took 2 years. 12 years plus 12 is 24 years to get through your first Veda. You then add your second Veda, that's another 12 years, 36 years. The third Veda, another 12 years, 48 years. To study your fourth Veda, another 12 years, 60 years. And those people were called Chaturvedis, people who studied 4 Vedas. I have met Dvivedis, I have met one Trivedi, I've never met the Chaturvedi. Trivedi, one who studied 3 Vedas, Dvivedi, one who studied 2 Vedas. Some of the things that I'm saying, I have mentioned at previous talks at the Bhavan, so there may be many of you who've heard this from me before, but I just wanted to bring everyone up to the same level of understanding as we go through these lectures. So for those who are new to the Bhavan's work and lecture series, I'm spending a bit more time on some of the basics here. But hopefully you still find it useful if you've heard some of this before. So the job of the Brahman was to oversee and make sure everything was run well at these ancient yajnas, these ancient ceremonies. And the Atharvaveda itself is a fascinating text where you really do have all aspects of the human condition. There's a famous verse about the Mahabharata, Dharmecha arthecha kamecha mokshecha bharatarishabha. In matters of dharma, right living, artha, acquiring wealth, kama, desire, moksha, spiritual liberation, yadi hasti tadanyatra. What you find in this text, you may find in other places. Yanne hasti nakutrachit. That which is not here, you won't find anywhere else. It's to say that the Mahabharata somehow encompasses the whole of the human condition. I actually feel that's true about the Atharvaveda, where you actually find the sacred and the earthy. You will find charms to make sure others do not fall in love with your partner. You will find charms, for example, to make your enemy sick. You then also have some of the deepest philosophy that we know attached to the Atharvaveda. The Atharvaveda has more Upanishads attached to it than any of the other Vedas. So that should tell you something about the balance of being in this world but not of this world. You have a beautiful hymn in chapter 12 of the book 12 of the Atharvaveda, the Bhumi Suktam. I posted it on Earth Day, where the hymn praises the earth as our mother who nourishes us. And through that nourishing, we take on an obligation to nourish her. In this era of climate change and the immense impact we're having on the planet compared to previous life forms, I feel Bhumi Suktam is something that should be studied by everyone to inculcate that spirit of love or for the grandeur of how the earth protects us, how fragile our existence is. Those of you who followed cosmology will probably know that there was a time when 3 of the inner rocky planets all had oceans, not just Earth, Venus, Mars. But over the, not just millennia, billions of years, this is probably, if an alien came to our solar system, probably 2.5, 3 billion years ago, they would have seen 3 blue planets. And that's just the inner solar system. We now know there are underground oceans in Europa, around Jupiter, around Enceladus, around Saturn, and even Pluto has an underground ocean. Water is much more prevalent than we think, but the conditions for life are not always there. Venus lost its oceans because of the runaway greenhouse effect. All the carbon dioxide trapped within it was released, creating this cloud that held the heat in from the sun. There was a time you could have sat on the surface of Venus and it would have been a spring day. That created acid rain, destroyed the planet. It's one of the hottest places we know, temperatures of above 400 degrees centigrade. No chance for life. Mars lost its magnetic field. The sun chucks out deadly cosmic rays all around it that without a shield would literally blast away any atmosphere and give a dose of lethal radiation. We're protected by that on Earth because of the magnetic field that the Earth has that deflects these charged particles. When they deflect and go through the night sky in the northern and southern hemisphere of the poles, you see this wonderful display of that electrical charge as the northern and southern lights, the aurora borealis and australis. Mars lost its magnetic field, then lost its atmosphere, and lost its ocean. So we've been protected here on Earth somehow. And Earth really is a mother, and there's just a long way of saying there was somehow this deep understanding and appreciation in the Vedic text, not just in the Atharvaveda, but in the Rig Veda, Yajurveda, that talk about our intimate connection with nature and the intimate interdependencies we have of being nourished by nature around us, but also an obligation to nourish nature back. There's a beautiful verse in the Yajurveda in the forest work portion. Shanno vatah pavatam matarishva shannastapatu suryaha ahanisham bhavantu nashagum ratref prati dhiyatam. That the wind blows sweetly for us, that the sun shine gently for us. It's this deep understanding of the power of the connection we have with the world around us. And somehow that understanding took these rishis on this much deeper spiritual journey that came forth in these mantras. And so having this universal vision of our place in the universe and the universe in us created these wonderful experiences of reality, the interconnectedness of everything around us that gave rise to a lot what you find in the tradition, the philosophical traditions of India, of Advaita philosophy, non-dualism, but across all Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, the same. So you find a very deep love and appreciation, understanding of the world around us in these ancient hymns. And this was something to be celebrated, which is why we had these ancient ceremonies, these yajnas, which were about a journey to take us to that spot when we realize our immortal nature and our place in the universe around us, and use the power of a ceremony, a ritual to do that. So that's the 4 Vedas that we have. How were those studied and how were they deployed? Well, each Veda has 4 sections: the Samhita, the Brahmana, the Aranyaka, and the Upanishad. The Samhita is the what? Those mantras that I talked about. How they're used is the second section, the Brahmanas. That's the manual, the hows. The third section is the start of the inquiry into the why. Why do we study these texts? And they're called forest works, Aranyakas, because you would study them in a quiet place in the forest with your gurus, your teachers, and start delving into the deeper meaning behind what all these mantras say. And the distilled essence of the why in the Aranyakas were the final chapters, sections. So they stood at the end of the Vedas. Vedanam antaha iti Vedantaha, the Vedanta texts, the Upanishads. So those are the distilled essence of the why teachings in all of the Vedic texts that you have. And all the Vedas have these 4 sections, and they were propagated in different schools. The Rig Veda once upon a time had probably 21 schools. There are only 2 left now, the rest are extinct. Yajurveda, over 40. There are less than 10 available to us today. And those that are active, probably 3 or 4 traditions, Krishna and Shukla Yajurveda, schools within. Samaveda, there were 1,000 schools. There are probably 4 left now. Atharvaveda, there were a number of schools until in the mid-20th century, we thought we only had 1 left. And then a scholar of another school was found, and Kanchi Paramacharya from Kanchi sent students to go and learn the Atharvaveda from those scholars before that whole era went extinct. And we've somehow preserved those, but they're on a fine thread. So anything we can do to further preserve this ancient wisdom for our lives today, we try and do in different ways. I would encourage you all to think, if you're able to support students of the Vedas in their schools in India and elsewhere, or learn them yourself. And that's the invitation in the summer. The way to preserve is to imbibe. And that's what we want to do with you in the summer school. But when you look at those teachings, the ability to see unity where there's diversity. What is the nature of this ceremony, the yajna? The word literally means sacrifice or offering. The theme you'll hear a lot in these lectures is that the ancient Vedic texts exhort you to live your life as a yajna, as a sacred offering to some higher purpose. To live a life of giving, not taking. Offering means giving. In these ceremonies, you offer flowers, you offer things into a sacred fire through a chant. They're all there to inculcate the practice of giving and compassion. For when you look back at your life, you can either ask the question, what did I take from this world? Or you can ask the question, what do I give to this world? And one of the fundamental messages from the ancient texts is, if you live a life where you gave more than you took, you led a fulfilled life. And these ancient texts, these rituals, are your ways of preparing yourself for a life of service compassion, and giving. And you have to just practice these things. These things don't come by themselves. You have to practice them. The how section, the Brahmana section that I talked about earlier, when you conduct a ceremony, if you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, it becomes a very mindful exercise. And yes, friends, the oldest practices we have of mindfulness are the texts that we find in the Brahmana texts, where they explain how to conduct a ceremony. Jahanudagni muttara veding khatva digapit nidi apam puriyatva, fill it with water. That's describing, you could say, kind of a technical manual to prepare the fire altar. But equally, it's about making you very present in the moment, very aware of everything you're doing, which is the heart of mindfulness practices, to make you very connected and aware of yourself in your current state. I often say to people, a big goal in life is just showing up. That means being present in everything you do. You'll see later the profound impact that has if you're able to be a very authentic present leader in business, in your personal life, and all around you. And these ancient rituals, these ancient teachings in the Vedic texts, they try and inculcate in you that spirit of love, service, compassion, the ability to be mindful and present in all your interactions, so you can live a life that truly becomes a great sacred offering. So that was the first taster I wanted to give in this opening lecture. We'll spend a bit more time in the second lecture on how the Vedas are taught and start going deeper into the Upanishad sections and a little more, what are those teachings that we have. And one thing I want you to see as we go through this is some people like to divide the ritualistic section and the knowledge sections. And somehow the ancient Vedic texts, they talk about something different. I tell you, it's not true. Some of the highest philosophy you find in the ancient texts. Nasiddhiya Suktam, the hymn that talks about, in the beginning was neither being nor non-being. Na sadasi, no sadasi, tadani, contemplates a creation before, a state before name and form. Rigveda, Ritanja Satyanja Bhi Idha Tapasodhyaja Yata, truth and the eternal cosmic order were born in a blazing fire of tapas. Sound a bit like the Big Bang to anybody? So you have some incredibly deep insights, even in the more ancient texts that are sometimes called non-philosophical. So I look forward to going through this journey with you, and the next lecture. I just want to pause to see if any questions have come through, Raghu, that we can start to answer. If not, then a couple of other points that I can make. So let me just pause and
sure.
If there are any questions, Raghu.
Thank you, Subhanu. So we have one question from Padmaji. The question is this: why have the schools dwindled? And is there anything we can do to proliferate besides studying ourselves?
Great question, Padmaji. I think it's fair to say that if you look at what it takes to study the Vedas, it takes a lot of commitment and effort. And even in ancient times, not everyone was able to study the Vedas. So the group of Vedic scholars was probably always the minority. But it was so interwoven with daily life that they survived. One of the extinct branches, the Karnataka, in the commentary on the grammar text of Panini in 400 BC, written by Patanjali, he talks about how the Karnataka branch was prevalent in every village in India. It's gone. I think one of the reasons is just the time commitment to do that and really invest your time. The other is the techniques. You memorize these texts. And so it's really not for everyone. I think also we see, if you believe the tradition, the degradation of different ages. We're in a more materialistic age. We seem to have forgotten our spiritual roots. People's minds are taken elsewhere and distracted. But one of the things we're trying to do is to find techniques how you can, using modern technology, accelerate that learning. So in Mattur village, where I trained, and when Nandaji, the Bhavan and Raghu come from, they can teach one Veda in 6 years, as an example. If you go on YouTube, you'll find now various scholars posting chanting of texts. Now, chanting is one thing, learning is something very different. But some of us have formed group societies to help fund students. So to fund food for a Vedic student for a year, it's probably like 100, 200 pounds a year. It's not a lot of money. In Indian currency, it's a lot. So many years ago, we formed a Veda society where people could donate, and we would then donate the funds to various schools in India teaching Vedic students. That you can do. One of the things we've done is to support publication of books. I'll maybe show it to you next time. We brought out a series of books in Mattur to encapsulate how do you conduct these ancient ceremonies, the prayogas, and various tools. I would like to support more creation of audiovisual tools to preserve and show people how these things were done using modern media. I think the other thing you can do, I would just challenge that when someone says it's something that we can't learn, everyone who is sincere can learn something, and then master it and be able to pass it on. And often if we want to effect change, it has to start in our own home. So there is that invitation for those who are interested to come and try and learn some of these mantras and open the window. And if out of 100 people, 1 or 2 walk through and go even further, our job's done. But thank you for the question. Back to you, Raghu.
Yeah, we have a question from Gigi, and his question is this: can the Vedas be compared to modern history books?
Great question. It's something that I've debated with many folks over the years. Our tradition, for a long time, did not put the same store as, say, other traditions into the profession called as historian. What does that mean? We do find historical events described in the Vedas and in the Puranas. Itihasa, they were called. They were histories, but they were embellished with the legend around it. Sometimes you have to extract the core truth. And the reason I believe that was the case is history in our tradition was there to deliver a message of how to be a better person, how to achieve some higher goal. And therefore, the message was considered more important than the detail. Even if you go back to the literature of ancient Rome, when I studied Latin at school, Livy ab urbe condita, as it was called, his monumental series, ab urbe condita, from the founding of the city of Rome. He wrote his history of Rome and the stories of Romulus and Remus, going through the various patrician and plebeian strifes, the creation of the republic. When you read those ancient texts, whilst he is the historian, you know there's embellishment there also. It wasn't until you got to the times of Tacitus, Suetonius, you started seeing more of a recording of events as they were. Even if you look at, for example, Herodotus, the histories in ancient Greek, as a historian, he tried to capture events, but those events happened before he even lived. And again, there is some embellishment. So we don't have what we would call today that ability to exactly record events as they happen, but we have enough that we can piece together certain ancient events. So we do know of ancient battles that took place, kings who lived in those times. I mentioned Krishna was mentioned as a king, and others. It's just a little harder to extract that information.
Padmaji asks another question. Is there any reason why the Vedas cannot be studied or taught as a main subject at institutions like Oxford, Cambridge, MIT, as opposed to being a very specialized sort of sub-course?
Probably the main barrier is lack of teachers, people who've studied these traditions. I think it's important to say, though, our tradition is not a proselytizing tradition, evangelical tradition. There is a verse in Sanskrit, Vaktaro kim karishyanti shrota yatra na vidyate What will a speaker do where there's no one to listen? Our tradition has always been on the basis of when a student is ready, the teacher, they will find their teacher. That was my personal experience, by the way, of how I was sitting in my apartment after studying Sanskrit with Dr. Nanda Kumara. In West London, I was sitting thinking, would it be lovely to study the Vedas, but I'm in London, no chance. I went to his Valmiki Ramayana class on the Tuesday, and he said, my older brother's visiting from India. Oh, by the way, he's a Vedic scholar. I couldn't believe my luck, my God. How did this happen? When I met him, I was lost to him in the first 15 seconds. There was some connection, just this feeling of surrender I had, and he took me under his wing with a friend of mine, and we studied the Vedas. Maybe some of you who are on this Facebook cast remember those times. So our tradition has been around always. When the student is ready, the teacher appears, and people are gravitated to those teachers. So, and I think that's a strength of our tradition, to not be evangelical that way. I think the barrier, though, often is lack of teachers. There's a simple solution to that. As I said before, educate yourselves at home. Your children are going to learn partly from school, but they learn a lot from you. And if you invest the time to really understand your tradition, many homes, you see children being taught shlokas, mantras. Urdu Shairi. I grew up from a tradition in North India of classical musicians and dancers. My mother was an accomplished Kathak dancer in her youth. She's still fitter than the rest of us. You know, I got my first spark of philosophy through my grandfather learning Urdu poetry. If that hadn't been in our house, I don't think I would have been on this journey. So don't underestimate the power you have in your hands to learn something for yourself, whatever the age you're at, and make a difference.
So we have a question from Bhavani, and who asks, are you able to share the names of Vedic schools that you're involved in supporting?
We support the Pathashala in Mattur village as an example. There are also schools. What we can maybe do, we can collect maybe a link on the website, Raghu. You know, there are schools in Mumbai. There's Sandipani Ashram is there in Bangalore, and there are various places across India. You can probably Google and find some. But we can certainly provide a link to that, so that if you want to support some of these schools, then we can connect you to those.
So a question from Monica: does taking part in pujas and at home or in Hindu Vedic temples continue the Vedic tradition?
Yes, because this is part of your mind training and inculcating that spirit of giving and offering. I think one of the things we're going to come on to in the second lecture is the barrier and the door to wisdom is your mind. And our mind is really in our control. And there's an analogy in the Upanishads that talks about how the 5 horses are your senses. And when they're not controlled by the reins, the mind, they wander here, there, and everywhere. And much of our tradition is mind training in the purest sense. You'll hear this from me a few times. Some of you are probably listening in, go to a gym when things are open, once, twice, 3 times a week, train your body. How much time do you spend to train your mind? Now we have modern techniques, mindfulness. So I ran a couple of mindfulness sections this week and the end of last week at work, actually, where colleagues were interested to participate and learn and go through a guided experience. So these pujas and rituals are there to help you inculcate and train your mind. Are they mandatory? Well, nothing in our tradition is mandatory. There are an infinite number of ways of approaching the infinite, but there are certain ways that have been prescribed to help build that discipline, that rigor, the mind training journey, to open the doors to deeper wisdom, for sure.
Thank you, Subhanu. That's the end of the questions. So really back to you.
Great. Well, some great questions from everybody. I would encourage you all, and those who will join the lecture next week, to think of questions that you have. If there appear to be a number of more questions, we can focus more on the Q&A versus the actual lecture. We'll start going deeper into the why behind the what and the Vedanta tradition in lecture number 2, to draw out some of those teachings and messages around who are we, what's our place in the universe, how do we connect to the world around us, and how do we live a life of purpose and meaning. So with that, I'd like to thank you all and look forward to seeing you, hearing you, getting your questions, same time next week. Namo Namaha.
Thank you, Subhanu, again. For everyone who's joined online, thank you very much for your participation. As we said, the PURÂ series will be every fortnight. So the next episode of this will be at 7 p.m. on Thursday, the 25th of June. Again, on Bhavan's Facebook page. For anyone who's missed this, you can absolutely share the link with your friends and rewatch it yourselves. And this entire series will be uploaded to YouTube in a few days, so you'll be able to go and revisit it on YouTube and find it there. So thank you all for joining. The Bhavan's got a number of live and pre-recorded events going on online. We have the Rasadhara live concert series every Wednesday at 6 p.m. We have this PURÂ lecture series every other Thursday at 7 p.m. And starting tomorrow, we have the Smriti Dhara, which is replaying of concerts from the Bhavan's archives from the last 40 years, every Friday, going live on our YouTube channel. So check it all out, and looking forward to seeing you all again, joining us in a couple of weeks' time for the next lecture.